We are really honored to be back with you again this month. As many of you know, and for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, we had our first town hall a month ago, the fourth Thursday, and our town halls are the fourth Thursday of every month. So we're so honored to have you with us. I am Fred Johnson. Fourth Thursday, I said, right? Yes. I'm Fred Johnson, artist in residence and also community engagement specialist for the Straz Center. And my co-host and person who really helps to drive this whole event, Miss Alice Santana, who is our interim director of education and community engagement at the Straz Center. We're so happy to take this journey with you together, and we have some very important guests with us this evening, and I will introduce them initially now, and then you'll get to know more about them as the program moves forward. Miss Gwendolyn Reese from St. Petersburg, Florida, Dr. Sybil Johnson, who originally from Tampa, living in St. Petersburg now. Mr. Fred Hearns, who many of you will know. Fred returns again to us. He was with us last month, Tampa historian and educator. Mr. Kim Townsel, currently residing in St. Petersburg, Florida, and working in conjunction with Miss Gwendolyn Reese this evening as we pay tribute to Dr. Bernard Lafayette. And also joining us, our American Sign Language interpreters, Miss Katie Bonneville, and then she will alternate with Miss Kristen Wilbur. So let the games begin. We wanted to start out by sharing for some of you who may not have been with us last month that this town hall event is a very important part of our deeper connection to our community. As many of you know, in the past couple of months, there have been, unfortunately, the continuation of some tragic events that have impacted Black, brown, and indigenous people of color in our country, and has expanded a conversation that has long been needed to be shared about the challenges and the injustice of discrimination and how it unfortunately continues to permeate our society and impact us in horrible ways. The unfortunate loss of life, the killing of George Floyd, prompted a new and louder and more intimately committed conversation about the need and the importance of all members of our community engaging in learning about each other, in people who have not been the victim of discrimination, to have the opportunity to understand more broadly the deep impact and the deep challenges that people of color face in America. And we have a shared commitment now, and the Straz Center leads that conversation that says it's important for us to educate, it's important for us to listen and learn, it's important for us to include, to be more diverse as an institution, to be committed to equity and access as well. And so based upon that, as many of you know, last month, the Straz Center for the Performing Arts put out a formal declaration, affirmation of 10 key points that will be the foundation upon which changes will occur, changes for the better and towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And so we highlighted that, and we had members of our community be a part of that conversation to share some of their experience with the Straz and acknowledge the importance of this, which, by the way, is happening across the country. Specifically as a performing arts institution, it has been amplified that artists, Black artists, have long performed on stages, but in positions of leadership and decision and production, there has been a huge gap. And so the center is committed to leading that conversation and engaging with the community, to help tell the story of Tampa Bay, to help people to understand the power of the reality of some of the pathways of challenge that Black folk in Tampa Bay have had to live through, and how together we share the telling of that story and highlight leaders, highlight artists, highlight visionaries from the community, from the Black, Brown, and Indigenous community, who really help to expand the roadmap and the understanding. So our town halls are designed to help all of Tampa Bay to more clearly understand and engage with the Straz Center, and to really amplify the voices of the community. And so we continue that journey this evening with our amazing guests. And we start this evening with a conversation with Dr. Sybil Johnson. Dr. Johnson has been a part of the presenting of art in Tampa Bay for many, many years. Born and raised here in Tampa. She's a graduate of Florida State University with a PhD in theater. She has traveled all over the world teaching and inspiring and educating. Many of us in this quadrant here have very positively been influenced and touched by her artistry and her gift and her love for the arts. So Sybil, welcome to this conversation. Along the way, over the years, I've had the opportunity to watch you perform, and even have had some pieces that you have created that I've had the blessing of being able to share with people, either through speaking them or singing them, mostly singing them, I guess. But also in our early conversations when we began this real conversation about how our lives as Black Americans have been affected, you have shared some really, really poignant and powerful stories about growing up here in St. Petersburg. Would you share with us some of those experiences and how, as an artist, and I love the stories that you tell as a young girl, how you found yourself coping with some of the bumps and bruises of discrimination?
You really can do a very, very good introduction, Fred. Thank you very much. That was like amazingly wonderful. I appreciate that. Yeah, I was born in Tampa in a hospital called Clara Fry, which was for African Americans specifically. And I lived in Tampa for most of my life until I was an adult, and then I did a lot of traveling and living in other places. But yeah, this is my home, and I've seen so many changes, and I still see changes today that just amaze me, that nobody else seems to see things that are changing, you know, and things that are getting out of hand. But, you know, I guess everybody's looking at it, but nobody can figure out what to do. But coming up to the conversation that we're having this evening about growing up here and how I coped as an artist, I knew I was an artist as a young girl. My mother just kept saying, you can't make money like that, so you need to get a degree in something where you can make money, right? You can't make money teaching theater, obviously. And you certainly can't get a PhD in it. That doesn't happen. But of course, those things did happen to me, and I'm so grateful to God for the blessings, because it's all about the blessings. I happened to be chosen to get a McKnight Fellowship out of, they only gave at that time 25 fellowships in the entire universe. And I was able to win one of those, and everything, all my college, I have no college bills, no student loans. Everything was paid for by the foundation. And I'm so grateful to that. It was called the McKnight Foundation then. I believe now they've modified the name a bit, but they still give scholarships to young people in areas where there are few people with degrees in that area of color, people of color. And so it expanded now more to Hispanic people and women. In my day, it was primarily African Americans. But when I was young, as I said, I wanted to dance. And my mother always tried to indulge us in whatever we wanted to do. My mother was born in Mississippi, and she was the first person in her family to really, my aunt went to college. Let me get that straight. She would turn over and just slap me right now if she heard me say Mama was the first person to go to college, because she really wasn't. Because Aunt Kitty went to college. but she never really, and she did some teaching when she was younger. But I came along when she was so advanced in age. All I can remember is that she really didn't work, and she was basically, as far as all of us kids were concerned, pretty much a busybody, telling us what to do. That was her job. But anyway, in the early days here in Tampa, I'd have to say that my mother navigated that time for us by giving us belief in ourselves, teaching us that we were just as good as anybody else. And she did that in amazing ways. And what I would do, I have some poems here, and it's so funny. If you would look at these poems, they're actually typed with a typewriter. That's how old these pieces of paper are, guys. This is like antique. And yes, I do need to digitize them. Yes, I do, and all of that. But of course, anyway. One particular thing sticks out in my mind when I speak about dance. I've always wanted to dance. And my mother found someone that was teaching, actually would teach Black girls, would actually allow Black girls to come to her class. She was a French woman who was evidently not very schooled on what it meant to be living in the South in those days. So she went ahead and said yes, that we could come to her class, come to her school. And it was in an area, South Tampa area. It was a pretty long way from where we lived. And I remember being so excited the first day we went and we learned jeté and arabesque and relevé. We learned all these words, these French words that meant, you know, whatever. And it was just so very Louis the 16th and just such a wonderful experience. But we couldn't change clothes in the dressing room. We had to come dressed and leave dressed. And finally, I guess after what seemed to me to be not a very long time at all, it could have been, you know, when you're a kid, time is sort of confusing. You can't really go back and say exactly, but after a while, the parents complained and they didn't want my sister and I in the classes. And my older sister, really was not all that interested in taking the classes anyway. So she was not really upset about it when it came to be that we couldn't take the classes anymore because the parents complained. And I cried and, you know, carried on. And she just, you know, looked at me and said, well, who wants to take ballet anyway? And so that kind of inspired a poem in my heart. Even back in those days, I was writing poetry. And the whole thing is, Mama used to say we got our culture through the back door. And so this particular poem says just that, backdoor culture.
Now, Sybil, how old were you when you wrote this poem?
Oh, I had to be in my 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to be in my 20s.
But the experience was when you were younger.
The experience was when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
The experience was when I was maybe 9, 8. But it just stuck in me and was a part of me. And it was just that when I was thinking about something else, and I remembered how Mama used to say we got our culture through the back door, and how interesting it was that we didn't understand that was a bad thing. Like, you know, we went to rent a pony for my younger sister's birthday, and she always remembers the horror of the fact that there were all these beautiful little ponies, but when we showed up and they realized we were Black, they wouldn't rent the ponies to us. They wouldn't rent the pony for the birthday. So she has a horrible memory about that. I don't remember it as well because it wasn't something I wanted to do, but we were living in a world that I think Zora Hurston got a bad rap for saying that segregation was good because we were forced to have to deal with each other and forced to be together and as a unit and not be so spread apart and going here and there. We were very close and everybody knew everybody. Fred will remember this, you know, back in the day, you couldn't get away with anything because your mom, everybody knew your mama, everybody knew your daddy, everybody knew you and knew where you needed to be and where you were not supposed to be. And if you lived in West Tampa, you were not supposed to be across the bridge, the Fortune Street Bridge, which we'll talk about later. But there were certain places you should and should not be. But anyway, let me just say this one little point here about backdoor culture. And I don't know how much poetry you want me to do or how much you want me to talk. So you have to kind of rein me in. You know how it is. You know, I made my living for many years just completely talking for 45 minutes straight. And I can do that on the subject of theater or most anything, but definitely the subject of theater. But Would you like for me to share a couple of poems, or what would you like, Fred?
Yeah, please, whatever feels right. You've got a bit more time. I'll let you know. I'll let
I
you
got a
know.
bit more time. You're going to give me what is this, the time out, right? That's time out.
I'll give you
We'll
some.
let you know when you have to cut
I'll
off.
let you
No.
know. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. I know you will, Alice. You'll get me straight. Well, this first one is short. It's called Backdoor Culture. And I was looking, and this is just a sidebar, I was looking at Wally B. and so impressed with this young man, who's a young man who grew up here in the community and who does poetry. And poetry has gone to a totally different level from when we used to do poetry back in the days with Otis Anthony and Myron Jackson. And back in the day, we used to do poetry. We had a poetry performance thing happening around, but it's like, believe me, it has moved to another level. And I'm so proud of these young people. And I hope we can feature them in the future so that more people can get to see what they're doing with spoken word. This is called Backdoor Culture. Mama says we got our culture through the back door. We took dance with Miss Renee, jeté, releve, arabesque, positions 1 through 5. But soon the other mothers threatened to leave if we stayed. After all, they couldn't allow their children to take class with 2 colored girls. My mother was so angry she cried. But I heard my sister say, who cares about ballet anyway? So that was that story. And it was devastating and it was sad and all of that, but out of it, I didn't stop wanting to dance, and I didn't stop trying to dance, and I didn't stop wanting to be in theater. And I met a beautiful woman who totally changed my life, Marcel Alexander. She was the director of the Young People's Theater at the University of Tampa. And they needed a colored girl, which I qualified for because I was a colored girl. They needed a colored girl to play the maid in a show that they were trying to mount at the Tampa at the Falk Theater. And somebody told her about me because I was really good with reading and I was really good with memorization. So somebody told her about me. I think it was my piano teacher, who was also a Caucasian woman, told this woman about me, and they invited me to come and be a part of the show. And from that show, I think I did 5 or 6 shows with that company. But the most interesting thing about it was everybody was nice to me. I didn't have any problems. And if things were going like they shouldn't, I didn't even see it. You know, if I was being treated unfairly, I didn't get it. But years later, I came to know that it was absolutely against the law, literally against the law, for me to be a part of that company. Because at that time, schools were not integrated and kids were separated, you know, and so it was against the law for me to be in that theater company. And so I think that it was just amazing that that's one of the things that happened in my life that is a major blessing, that changed everything, because I learned all about theater before I ever went to college. I learned all about theater. Tampa was a place where racism was very much alive, but you knew where you needed to go and where you didn't need to go. You could go on Central Avenue, you could go to the Lincoln Theater, you could go to the Carver Theater, you could go certain places. But if you tried to go places you weren't supposed to go, you might get your feelings hurt. And so that always was something that we had to keep in mind. There was a place that they had here called the Super Test. I know Fred remembers the Super Test because you used to get these little tickets when you got your gas. And we had I remember one time we had a whole glove compartment full of tickets in the Chevy. It was a 50-something Chevy, I don't know. And I was so excited because I just knew we were going to get to go. And you paid for the rides with the tickets, right? Well, colored people could only go one day a week, and that's Thursday. All the rest of the time, you couldn't go. So this particular Thursday, when we had it was just so full, so many tickets, we could have just rode the rides and thrown up and for all night, you know, it would have been just wonderful to get sick on the Ferris wheel over and over again. My mother said, you know, I'm going to throw every one of those tickets out, because if we can't go any day we want to go, we won't go at all. And I'm like, but no, why? No, you don't do that. But it was a big lesson for me, you know, that she was a proud woman. You know, she was educated, which was amazing for someone of her age. She had a master's degree eventually, but she She graduated from Wilberforce University and had a degree in speech therapy. So she was a professional speech therapist. So we were always exposed to the best. If she couldn't afford it, she figured out how to afford it, and we didn't know she couldn't afford it. We didn't know we didn't have money to do the stuff we wanted to do, because we did everything that, you know, we wanted to do in the realm that we lived in.
Yeah. I think this is such a really, really important point. You know, oftentimes in the last couple of months, there have been so many conversations where people who have not been the victims of discrimination and Jim Crow tend to think that this is something that happened long, 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 long ago. And the fact is, you know, every one of us that sits in this gathering have all profoundly been affected by discrimination, segregation, Jim Crow, not being able to go places, not being able to drink at water fountains, not being able to go to the bathroom, you know, segregation where you weren't able to go to school with black and white together. I mean, this is not that far removed from our reality. And the whole idea that in spite of, we move forward. And so great honor and kudos to your mother. I did have the opportunity to meet her. She was a amazingly dignified, powerful, beautiful, magnificent example of how to be and how to present yourself in the world. And certainly you and all of your family members exemplify that. So thank you so much for sharing that. We'll come back together with chapter 2 in a little bit. Want to invite folks now to be introduced yet again to Mr. Fred Hearns. Fred, welcome to the Community Voices. Great to have you here. Again, Tampa historian, worked in the structures and understands the city and the workings of the city. Had been involved with that for many, many years. Also an educator and an inspirer, and also takes folks on tours so that they can really learn about this city. You too, who did not grow up, we weren't born here, but you've been here a long, long time. You grew up here. Talk to us a bit about your experience, and take us ultimately to that bridge that links east side of the river and the west side of the river.
Right. Well, thank you, Fred and Alice, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. Fred, I don't know how this happened, but I also live in St. Petersburg, like your other 3 guests.
Yeah, everybody.
So we all live in St. Pete.
Yeah.
I've lived in the northern part of St. Petersburg for the last 6 years.
Yes.
But grew up in Tampa, was born in the Bronx, New York, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But okay, is that a hand for Bronx? Yeah? So I was born a Yankee fan. I like to tell people that. I go to the Rays games, but I am a Yankee fan. So growing up in Tampa, I grew up in East Tampa, the other side of the Hillsborough River. And as Sybil can attest to, we had this friendly rivalry between Belmont Heights, East Tampa, and West Tampa in the form of Howard W. Blake High School and George S. Middleton High School. Those were the only 2 high schools African Americans could attend in the 1950s and 60s. Until the late 1960s, and that's when some students began to go to the other schools, but primarily we were in that world where I played in the band from 2nd grade on through 12th grade. And whenever the football team would play another opponent, we never had a home field. Neither did Blake High School. Blake High School played their home games at Phillips Field, owned by the University of Tampa. And I have to say, looking back in retrospect, The University of Tampa did not have to let us use their facility. They didn't have to do that, but they did it. That's also where Middleton High School played all of our home games. So whenever we played a game in Tampa, it was played at Phillips Field against other Black high schools. So that segregation, was rampant. And our parents had adjusted to it long before we came along. They helped us adjust to it. And we made wonderful things out of a situation that many people would have thought would have handicapped us. It did not do so. It did not do that. And so getting to the Fortune Street Bridge, because I do want to talk about that just a moment. I really do literally owe my existence to the Fortune Street Bridge. Fortune Street Bridge, and Fred, I think I've told you this story before, because it separated West Tampa from downtown Tampa, which it still does. My father lived on Highland Avenue, where we now have Waterworks Park, right behind Stetson Law School. That was a Black neighborhood, and my father grew up on Highland Avenue. My mother lived in the North Boulevard Public Housing Projects in West Tampa on Main Street, 923 Main Street. The building nearest to the traffic light on North Boulevard and Main Street. And so when my father met my mother as a sophomore, they were both sophomores at Middleton High School. Then for 11th and 12th grade, my father transferred over to Don Thompson High School. But he would walk across the Fortune Street Bridge to meet my mother. And they would sit on the swing on the front porch, and they would rock back and forth, and, they fell in love. And so my father used to tell me, I used to hit that bridge and walk across over to West Tampa. And if you didn't live in West Tampa, back in the 40s, and even later than that, you kind of needed to know somebody in West Tampa who could vouch for you, or else you get run back across the bridge. So my uncle, Israel Tillman, who everybody in West Tampa knew in the 1940s, really liked my father. I mean, they were good friends. And so he would tell people, don't mess with Sam Hearns. He's over here to see my sister. November 28, 1948, I was born. And I was born in the Bronx, but my mother brought me back to Tampa a year later. So I grew up in East Tampa. That was pretty much all I knew growing up. The Fortune Street Bridge was always known as the Fortune Street Bridge. But many of us didn't even realize it was named for an African-American woman. I mean, that just wasn't something people talked about. I'm sure some people knew it, but that was part of the Tampa tradition of walking across the Fortune Street Bridge back and forth. That was how the early cigar makers in West Tampa were able to connect to downtown and to the port where some of the tobacco would come in, and some of them would live in Ybor City and walk across the bridge to go to work, or some would walk across the bridge going back the other direction. Then in 1967, I believe, when the interstate came through, the I-275, I-75, and I-4, when that interchange came through, the streets were reconfigured, and Laurel Street became the street that replaced what had been Fortune Street. Not only did they change the name of the street, they changed the name of the bridge. So it became the Laurel Street Bridge in 1967, after being the Fortune Street Bridge since the 1890s. But at that time, I was president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH, the Tampa Bay chapter. ASALH was formed by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in Chicago in 1915. So ASALH petitioned the city of Tampa to change the name from Laurel Street Bridge back to the Fortune Street Bridge. It took a few years, but it eventually did happen. Now, Fortune Taylor, this Black woman, during the Civil War, when she got her freedom, one of the first things she and her husband did was to seek a land grant. And they acquired 33 acres of land on the east side of the Hillsborough River. So the land that the Straths sits on back in the 1870s and 1880s was owned by this Black woman, Fortune Taylor. Very unusual for an African-American to be honored as she was honored by having the bridge named for her. Now we know that Hugh McFarland, who is recognized as the founder of West Tampa, many people have been to McFarland Park, named for him. He and some other white businessmen got together and they financed the bridge from West Tampa to the east side. But they wouldn't have been able to do it had not Fortune Taylor worked with them, cooperated with them, and to pay tribute to her, they named the bridge the Fortune Street Bridge. And again, I owe my existence to that bridge. I'll give you one more example, though, of segregation and how it affected us in Tampa. I think the worst situation I can remember as a young man growing up, I was leaving Booker T. Washington Junior High School after my 9th grade year. And that summer, we were all anticipating the 9th graders going to Middleton High School as sophomores. We had a basketball team at Booker T. Washington for boys and one for girls. And by far the best athlete, the best basketball player, even better than a lot of the boys, a better shooter, was this young woman named Gwendolyn Dallas. And Gwen Dallas, like me, was in 9th grade. We were getting ready to go to Middleton High School the next year. And that summer, Gwen's family went out to Walker's Lake. Segregation barred us from coming to the beaches. That's one reason I live in St. Petersburg. I can walk to the beach from where I live now. You know, I get a little revenge that way. I get to go to the beach whenever I want to. That wasn't the case, Sybil, when we were growing up. So we went to these lakes way out in the woods in northwest Hillsborough County. Walker's Lake, Keystone Lake, those were our beaches. Gwen Dallas and her family were out at Walker's Lake that summer on a Sunday afternoon, and Gwen drowned in Walker's Lake. No lifeguards. You know, there were sinkholes all over the place. I mean, you just kind of swam at your own risk. She was not the first person to drown there, and she was not the last. But what an impact that made on Tampa, because the Dallas family, a large, well-known family, this beautiful young lady, Gwen, never got to go to high school, never got to graduate, never got to do a lot of the things that we've been blessed to do. And segregation was responsible for sending her out to Walker's Lake that Sunday, because we couldn't go to the beaches where there were lifeguards. We had one pool that African Americans could visit at that time, Cyrus Green. And that was, I think that left more of an impression on me as to what happens to people who are discriminated against because of their race. The drowning of Gwen, and wow, every time I get emotional now just thinking about it, just talking about it, Gwen Dallas. Yes. So those are some thoughts of mine and some of the things that I wanted to share this evening.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Fred. And enter Dr. Sybil again. And this is, we had a question last month, and the question was how can the arts serve to educate or move people's understanding and forward, and how can arts be a part of this whole conversation about race? And so the Strath Center, we have one of our programs there is a program called Arts Legacy Remix. And Arts Legacy Remix is really dedicated to celebrating, honoring, and sharing the rich culture and the rich history of Tampa Bay from all lenses of cultural and ethnic contribution. And so this awareness of Madam Fortune Taylor that Fred just shared with us, and I know that some of the data and information that we got was by virtue of some of Fred's information that he shared. And so Sybil, in her great artistry in conjunction with the Straz Center, really is bringing to life the character of Madame Fortune Taylor. You know, there's a lot of telling of story about the divide and what we weren't able to do. But Madame Fortune Taylor must have been a magnificent human being, because her reach in the community and the level of dignity and the level of ability that she had to really interface with all of the folk downtown was really pretty magnificent. So Sybil, let's talk for a little bit about Madame Fortune Taylor and the bringing to life of Madame Fortune Taylor. One of our performances, our January performance, I believe it was, commemorating and remembering Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., began by Madame Fortune Taylor coming up onto stage, of course, portrayed by Sybil. So talk a little bit about that, Sybil. Turn your mic on. You got to turn your mic back on.
I'm muted. Am I cool now? You hear me?
Yep, you're good.
You know, every day I go to work, whether I'm working at a university or whether I'm teaching kids in the community, it's like a big joke on everybody else that they think I'm working and they don't know. I'm just enjoying myself, because my life is all about acting. My life is all about theater. And so when I was given the opportunity to bring Madame Fortune Taylor to life, it was the biggest, most wonderful thing that had happened, because I'd been in the South Pacific teaching. I fell and hurt my knee in the street and almost had to roll out of the street. Ended up having to come back to Florida for knee surgery. And I just really hadn't been doing any acting. I hadn't been doing any work except for some teaching. And so it was great to get the opportunity to bring this character to life. It was something I've never done. I've played many, many roles, but never played an actual person who lived and actually brought that person back like they do with the Chautauqua or some of the things that the Humanities Council does. I have a good friend who did Zora Hurston for many years, and I always longed to be able to do that. So I got that. I just can't wait until COVID goes away and we can just do more and more and more of it, because it's just such a wonderful feeling. I did the research. I read all that was available. I even, found some other things about her, but there were no photographs of her and no recordings of her voice, just some descriptions of her as a short, chubby lady, which I figured I could really play that. I could typecast that really easily. Wasn't hard to do. And I got to wear a hoop skirt, which is absolutely a hoot. I had everybody laughing about that. We had so much fun. Alice and Giovanna and Fred and I had so much with the hoops, the whole costume thing. But it's just to know that this woman had the tenacity to stick with her farming and her selling of goods and the way she moved through the community. I felt so much like my mom. I thought, that's how mom was. Mom, she didn't care. She was friends with the mayor. We'd be in the middle of dinner and the phone would ring and she said, oh, I got to talk to the mayor. Hold on. Yeah, hello, Mayor Greco, blah, blah, and she was on the hospital board and all these different boards. And right, Fred, you remember how mom did. It was like amazing stuff she did that, unfortunately, her last years, she had Alzheimer's. So she didn't leave gracefully. And that's the one sad thing, that she went away. She couldn't remember any. She didn't know, Alzheimer's is just a horrible thing to happen, because she was so bright and so full of life and so much fun. And she would talk to us. My sister and I knew more about the business of other grown people in Tampa, because she couldn't tell anybody. She would come home and tell us. And she would say, don't say anything, but so-and-so and so, Bob Gilder did da-da-da. And my sister said, 12 o'clock at night, and he's knocking on the door, Bob Gilder. Bob was one of the pillars of the community. He was, it was just so amazing to see my mom. And when I looked at the Fortune Taylor history and I thought about how she was, and I thought about my mom, and I kind of put the two together as the one woman I know who would have had some orange groves and would have bought some property on the river had she been there at that time. Fortune Taylor was married and very much in love with her husband. And I enjoyed playing up that a bit, because we don't get the romance a lot of times when they recreate African-American women or like, you know, like Aunt Jemima, you know, we don't have any sexuality. We just, you know, we bring pancakes to the table, or we are providers. But the sexual beauty and femininity and all that stuff is sometimes missed. So I tried to add that to her character. I tried to let her be feminine, and she had the gloves and she had the things, you know, that I thought she would have had. And I actually had a watch from the 1800s, because I'm a collector of all things, you know, thrift. So I have a watch from the 1800s, and I looked at that watch and I just thought about it, and I did some of the stuff we do as actors. You know, I you know, thought about who had that watch in the 1800s and what did they think. And so it was just a wonderful exercise, and something that I'll use when I'm teaching, if I'm ever back in the classroom, in the university classroom, or in the professional realm of teaching acting. There's so many things I learned. And I was encouraged to do this by one of the members of the Arts Legacy team, Jennifer. She'll be mad I named her out, called her out, but I'm gonna call her out because Jennifer. Sometimes you can just say 2 or 3 things to a person that can change their lives. And that's the power of the spoken word. That's the power of the arts. That's the power of the positivity that we create when we put into the world the beauty that's in us. When Fred sings, you know, the beauty that's in him just fills the room. And everybody's sitting there amazed. And he's looking at them like, well, why are they looking at me like that? I'm just singing, because to him it's not really a big deal. But yes, Madam Fortune Taylor, her legacy, her life, I hope that we can go more into it and do a lot more. Because we went to a school and did a lecture. I was very well received. The students were beautiful kids, very well behaved, even though it was close to lunchtime. They were very polite to Fred and I. And they didn't get up and leave or anything. And we enjoyed that. And we also did it more than one time, actually.
We did, and it's a continued work in progress. And so we're hoping that as we get back onto the river and as we get back to having more access, that Madam Fortune Taylor's story will be full and rich. So thank you so much. Thanks so much. I had the opportunity to hear briefly the next gentleman that we're going to really honor and acknowledge. And in the short period of about 30 minutes, I felt like I learned so much more about what it is to be fully dedicated and committed to the rights of people, to see people as whole, to recognize people for the content of their character and not the color of their skin. We honor now and acknowledge a gentleman who is a minister, truly one of the icons in the civil rights movement, continues to be a lecturer, educator, and he's a native of Tampa, Florida. And we're honored to take this journey with Miss Gwendolyn Reese. And Gwendolyn, I'm just going to read a little bit from your bio because I want people to have just a whisper of the great work that you do. Gwendolyn Reese is president of the African American Heritage Association of St. Petersburg, Florida, and CEO of Peyton Reese Peyton Consulting Incorporated. She serves on the St. Petersburg Community Planning and Preservation Commission and co-chairs Pinellas Remembers, a project of the Equal Justice Initiative, working to install a historical marker at the site of one of the lynchings that occurred in Pinellas County, and to educate the community to the horrors and long-lasting impact of racial terror lynchings. Her current projects include, and it goes on to talk about many, many, many things, completing phase 2 of the African American Heritage Trail in Methodist Town, the Timbuktu Center for African and African American Studies, which is a free educational experience for school-age youth, their parents and teachers. And so, you know, she has an illustrious bio of sharing history and in such a powerfully dignified way, sharing our history and sharing that in spite of story, the richness of what Black folk have been able to do and achieve and are just now really having the opportunity to have this story told. And so the gentleman that I spoke about is Dr. Bernard Lafayette, and Gwendolyn has a special affinity and a special connection to Dr. Lafayette. So Gwen, welcome to Community Voices, and thank you so much for sharing this wonderful connection to and the dignified life of Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who is still with us and still going strong. So welcome.
Namaste and good evening. And thank you, Fred, for that introduction. And thanks to the Straz and Alice for producing this memorable event. I'm so pleased to be a part of this Voices of the Community Town Hall. I know we're 13 minutes over schedule, but it is not possible to shorten telling the illustrious life of Dr. Bernard Lafayette. And I have that distinct honor of paying tribute to him and sharing parts of his life and legacy with you this evening. Bernard Lafayette Jr. is a longtime civil rights activist and organizer, minister, educator, lecturer, and has been recognized as a major authority on strategies for nonviolent social change and as one of the leading exponents of nonviolent direct action in the world. Lafayette was born in July 1940 in Tampa, Florida, the eldest of 8 children. His parents were Bernard Lafayette Sr. and Verdale Lafayette. His siblings are Harold, Roselia, Brenda, Jerry, Michael, and Victoria. His family was poor, and he started working odd jobs at the age of 11 to help the family. Lafayette speaks so lovingly of his grandmother, Ma Foster, and he recalls an incident that occurred when he was about 7 years old and headed downtown with his grandmother. They decided to take a cable car, and segregation laws at that time required Black people to pay at the front door and then go to the back to actually enter the cable car. After being paid, the driver started driving away before he and his grandmother could board, pocketing their money and leaving them stranded. Lafayette says this was one of the first instances where he realized he wanted to do something about how his people were treated, and that desire has never left him. In 1958, Lafayette moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and enrolled in the American Baptist Theological Seminary. He and John Lewis were roommates. They would talk late into the night about their experiences growing up in the South. According to a recent article written by Dr. Lafayette, he and Lewis thought about how things could be different, and they both developed a commitment at a young age for civil rights and social change. During the course of his freshman year, he took classes in nonviolence at the Highlander Folk School, and he attended many meetings promoting nonviolence, but he didn't go willingly at first. But his roommate, John Lewis, refused to give up. And finally, after much badgering, and mainly to get Lewis to stop talking, he attended his first nonviolence workshop, and he was hooked. Throughout 1958 and 1959, he learned more and more about the philosophy of nonviolence while taking weekly seminars from civil rights leader James Lawson, a representative of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Lafayette began to use the nonviolent techniques as he became more exposed to the strong racial injustice of the South. In 1959, he, along with his friends Diane Nash, James Bevel, and John Lewis, all members of the Nashville student movement, led sit-ins at restaurants and businesses that practiced segregation in Nashville. When Ella Baker, under the auspices of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, organized a conference of students on Easter weekend in 1960, Lafayette was there. This conference led to the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. In President Obama's eulogy of John Lewis, he said, and I quote, In 1960, just weeks after the Supreme Court ruled that segregation of interstate bus facilities was unconstitutional, Lewis and Lafayette bought 2 tickets, climbed aboard a Greyhound bus, sat up front, and refused to move. This was months before the first official freedom rides. They were doing a test, and may I add, an extremely dangerous test. The trip was unsanctioned. Few knew what they were up to, and at every stop through the night, the angry drivers stormed out of the bus and into the various stations. Lewis and Lafayette had no idea what he might come back with or who he might come back with. Nobody was there to protect them, and there were no camera crews to record events. Imagine, just imagine the courage and determination it took to challenge an entire infrastructure of oppression at the young age of 20. Lafayette and Lewis chose to challenge the system during that 1960 Christmas break from school by riding the bus from Nashville to Troy, Alabama, which is where John Lewis lived, and then Lafayette continuing on to Tampa. They both sat at the front of the bus with Lewis sitting behind the driver and Lafayette across the aisle from him. They refused to move to the back of the bus when confronted by the driver, and they rode in those front seats throughout the trip. When they parted, there was a lingering thought that they might not see each other again. So it was very natural for both of them to get involved when in 1961, the Congress of Racial Equality Corps initiated a movement to enforce federal integration laws on interstate bus routes. This movement, known as the Freedom Rides, had African American and white volunteers ride together on bus routes throughout the segregated South. The Freedom Ride started in May 1961, but Lafayette's parents refused to allow him to participate in that first ride. You see, he needed parental permission because he was not yet the required age of 21. And his father said, "I am not signing your death warrant." But after the Freedom Riders were violently attacked in the city of Anniston, Alabama, the Nashville student movement, of which Lafayette was a member, vowed to take over the journey. And so in May 1961, in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, Lafayette and other riders were greeted at the bus terminal by an angry white mob made up of members of various Ku Klux Klan chapters, and they were viciously attacked. The Freedom Riders were brutally beaten, and his fellow riders, William Barbie and John Lewis, were beaten until they fell unconscious. In June 1961, Lafayette with other riders were arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, and served 40 days at the notorious Parchman State Prison Farm, often called, even today, one of the worst prisons in America. During Lafayette's participation in civil rights activities, he was beaten and arrested more than 27 times. In the summer of 1962, Lafayette accepted a position as director of the Alabama Voter Registration Project with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to do organizing work in Selma, Alabama. On the night of June 12th, 1963, the same night Medgar Evers was murdered in Mississippi, Lafayette was severely beaten by a white assailant. While badly injured, he was not deterred from doing his work. In early 1965, Lafayette, Bevel, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Nash, and others organized a series of public demonstrations that finally, culminating with the march from Selma to Montgomery, put enough pressure on the federal government to take action and gave enough support to President Lyndon Johnson for Johnson to demand the drafting and passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When Dr. Martin Luther King launched SCLC's Chicago campaign in 1966, he appointed Lafayette to help plan and execute the campaign's direct action program. After King hired him as SCLC's program coordinator in 1967, it became Lafayette's responsibility to plan the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. Following King's assassination, Lafayette continued to work on the campaign with Reverend Ralph Abernathy. Lafayette received his master's in education from Harvard University in 1972 and a doctorate in 1974. He served as a scholar in residence at the King Center. And after teaching at several universities, he was named president of his alma mater, American Baptist Theological Seminary in 1993. While a senior fellow at the University of Rhode Island, he helped to found and later became the director of the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies. The center promotes nonviolence education using a curriculum based on the principles and methods of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Lafayette is a distinguished scholar in residence at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. He was named and honored as the Doctor of Humane Letters from Mount Holyoke College in May 2012, and in 2014, the University of Rhode Island honored him with an honorary doctorate in recognition of his lifetime nonviolence leadership for civil and human rights. He's written several books about his experience in the civil rights movement and his views and thoughts regarding nonviolence. These include The Leader's Manual, a structured guide and introduction to Kingian nonviolence, the briefing booklet, an orientation to the Kingian nonviolence conflict reconciliation program, and In Peace and Freedom, My Journey in Selma. He's married to his gracious and beautiful wife, Kate. And on a personal note, I've known him for years. We met while I was serving as director of the YWCA of Tampa Bay's Institute for Social Justice, and we continued working together when I served as the coordinator of social justice for the Alabama Institute of Social Justice. It is such a pleasure for me to be honoring a man who was not afraid of getting into what the Honorable John Lewis called good trouble, necessary trouble. He is one of the most courageous and peaceful men I know, and one I'm proud to call friend, Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gwendolyn. What an amazing, sharing of this great man. And, I must also add that the dignity that you have shown us and the sharing of this story is who you are every day. And so much of that richness and that dedication lives in you and with you and all that you do. I'm honored also now to share with Tampa Bay, Mr. Kim Townsel, who is very much aligned with that Kingian nonviolence methodology. Again, I'll read a little bit from Mr. Townsel's bio, because it's super long because of his contributions to the world and what he has done. Mr. Townsel is the principal consultant of Townsel Consulting Group. It's a human service management company that focuses on strengthening relationships through education and training and of professionals and customized training and presentations to meet the needs of business institutions. Mr. Townsel is nationally certified as a crisis intervention trainer and has been a staff developer around the areas of conflict resolution and crisis and human equity and diversity for over 30 years. I can personally attest to the fact that Mr. Townsel has done incredible work throughout the country, and especially here in Tampa Bay, especially as it relates to our educational systems and really providing equity and inclusion and telling true and authentic stories so that our young Black children are more deeply understood and that opportunities are provided for them and understanding. He builds a bridge of understanding, and I've been really honored to watch him do that work over and over and over again. And I could go on and on and on and on. But Kim, it's really important for us to know that you are deeply connected to and a great representative for Dr. Lafayette's formulation of the Kingian Nonviolence Institute. So please talk to us about that.
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, Gwen, that was emotional, especially in our times and where we are in the journey. I want to talk about the legacy of Dr. King and how the legacy is passed on. The legacy passed on from King to Dr. Bernard Lafayette the night before he was murdered at the Lorraine Motel. The conversation went something to the effect of, young man, we need to, and this is King speaking directly to Lafayette, young man, we need to institutionalize the concepts of nonviolence. We need to institutionalize it and we need to internationalize it because the conflicts that we're facing and seeing are global in perspective. And we need to ensure that that is done. I remember very distinctly those words in terms of listening to Dr. Lafayette tell many stories about his life and his experience. And I remember when I first heard that story about 20 years ago at a training with Dr. Lafayette, with Charles Alphen, with John Jones, and with David Jensen. They are the primary keepers of the cloth. They were very influential in helping me to move to a mindset or a mindfulness or an awareness about nonviolence. But going back to that very distinctive story in which King said to Lafayette, I am charging you with this responsibility. Wow, can you imagine yourself being charged with a responsibility by Dr. Martin Luther King at age 21, 22 years old? Well, he picked up the gavel. He researched, looked at, gathered information from James Bevel, from John Lewis, from C.T. Vivian, from Reverend Metz J. Rollins, and others, from Diane Nash, from so many others. And in putting that together, he developed, along with David Jensen, a curriculum. And the curriculum is entitled Kingian Nonviolence, Conflict Resolution, Reconciliation, and in actuality, it has evolved to the point where you cannot go any place in the world where there has been conflict or there is conflict, and that the Kingian assertions, the 6 steps and 6 principles have not been asserted or have not been brought into play. I want to be brief in terms of what I'm about to share with you in reference to my experience, personal experience in challenging myself to learn about Kingian nonviolence. Now I say learn because I'm in this thing 20 years of investment and I'm still learning every day about the movement, about individuals, and about the courageous few who stood and impacted the lives of others. Kingian nonviolence is a way of life. It is not a problematic thing in which you can pick up and put down. It requires a long and deep examination of oneself, introspection and self-reflection. It requires that one make a personal commitment. It requires that one accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause. And as we look at these things and you hear these things, these are part of the 6 principles and the 6 steps. Simplistically, and it's not simple, but simply stated, the 6 steps and the 6 principles are the foundation. The 6 principles are the will or the desire. As we look at the videos from that era and we looked at people being hurt, people being damaged and not fighting back. Well, how are they doing that? That was training. That was planning. That was role playing. That was examining what would happen, that the students and parents and even children went through this training in order to better themselves, to prepare themselves for what was going to take place. No summer soldiers in this. The thing about Kingian nonviolence, and one of the things that's taught in moving to nonviolence, is everybody can have a role. Your role may not be to be a protester and marching. Your role may be writing letters or dealing with legislation. But Kingian nonviolence covers a wide spectrum. It builds consensus. It enables strategies to move forward. It advances the agenda. On a personal level, quite frankly, it saved my life. People who know me are puzzled and confused that 20 or 30 years ago, they would not have imagined my name and nonviolence close to it. I was, like most, in the Bronx, grew up in the Bronx, and the things that many of you spoke about in terms of suffering the indignity of, if that was happening in the North, Fred, you from Jersey, I'm sure you know, there was fighting, there was violence for real. Somebody was gonna get some knots, and if somebody got hurt, we wasn't gonna be the last one. That was for sure. And that mentality was a matter of survival. At least I thought. That was the only way I could survive. And it wasn't until after I came through college, after I had the opportunity to travel and go different places and see different parts of the world, that that stuff began to slow down. Reading some stuff about James Lawson and reading some stuff about C.T. Vivian, being close to the church, hearing that. And then when I came upon Kingian nonviolence, everything changed. I was hooked immediately. I was longing for something that would allow me to not only arm myself, but also arm my daughters, my children. Place something within them that would allow them to recognize and how to deal with issues of violence and conflict, and most important, reconciliation. So that was a natural grasp for me. And I grasped it and I held on to it. And Dr. Bernard Lafayette has become my mentor from an early stage. So too have some of my early teachers in Kingian nonviolence. And one of the things I want to say about Dr. Lafayette, I want to say many things. He's genuine, sincere, and every now and then a bit unusual, because he will give you something of his personality every time you interact with him. But that genuine, sincere, courageous nature is always present. His recall is fabulous. He is a thinker and a creator. He has patience and is in fact a true peace warrior. And I thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about Kingian nonviolence. But if you happen to look it up, you will find that it is all over the world. And in the process, if you want to track Dr. Bernard Lafayette for 2 weeks, good luck, because he is all over the world.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so very, very much. And we know that Kingian nonviolence and that understanding and those practices, you are a part of helping to teach that. We invite people, if you want to get more information about how to acquire this training, be in touch with us at the STRAS and we will forward that information to you. Because now more than ever, there are so many elements of this teaching that we need. Dr. Lafayette still stands strong as a living example of courage, wisdom, spirit, and we need that so much now. And Tampa is so honored that you know, he was born here. And the greatest thing that we can do is to honor him by learning from him and
Yes.
being living examples for that.
Yes.
We've gone a little bit over what we usually do, but here's the beauty in this. We're guided to go where we need to go, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. We've known for a long time, you can never do this in an hour, so you know, but that wasn't really the intention. You know, the important thing is for us to really share with you something of great value, and we certainly have experienced and heard and felt information of great, great value. I will tell you that the journey is not over in our search with Dr. Lafayette. I know that Fred has put forth some efforts to try to see if we can create an opportunity for Dr. Lafayette to really be honored, you know, by his city. I do believe that, you know, check your listings and things. I believe that there is a tomorrow evening with Kathy Castor. I believe she's doing an interview with Dr. Lafayette. We're not sure exactly how you connect to that, but please check that out. It's probably on her website. There is an interview tomorrow with her. We are so grateful to you, Gwendolyn Reese, to you, Kim Townsel, to you, Fred Hearns, to you, Dr. Sybil Johnson, and to you, Alice Santana, and to all of you for being with us again on this journey as we continue to have the voices of community speak out, and we learn together and we share together and we grow together. Next month, on the fourth Thursday, we will have our next town hall. A portion of that will be honoring and talking about our great John Lewis and Good Trouble, the film. Alice has some additional information. We will be on the Thursday, that Monday, the 21st, I believe that NJ Pack, one of our brother and sister performing arts centers around the country are doing a tribute. So Alice, share with folk how they can take a look at that.
Yes, soon you'll all be receiving some information from us at the Strass Center about the opportunity to view the John Lewis film Good Trouble. And as a part of that, we're a part of a couple performing arts centers who are going in on this endeavor together. And on that Monday, September 21st, NJ Pack, as Fred mentioned, will be hosting a national panel conversation about the film. And then on that Thursday, September 24th, we will resume our local Voices of the Community. So we hope that you all take part in viewing this film and having this discussion with us. So please stay tuned. If you've been signing up, sending us questions, you will receive more information from us coming forward.
Very good. Thank you so much, Alice. And again, thank you to all of you. We honor you so much. And thanks so much to our interpreters for their hard work. We hope we didn't talk too fast.
I have one more thing before we leave. We
Yes.
did have a request for a photo of Dr. Sybil Johnson as Madam Fortune Taylor. So we had our marketing folks quickly pull one up for me. If you don't mind, I share it really quick.
Absolutely. We would love to see that. There she is. Woo!
And that's on our Riverwalk stage at the Straz that I miss so much right now.
That's right. That's right. I remember that. That was such a magnificent night. And we will have the opportunity to see Madam Fortune Taylor again as we continue to evolve and tell this story. So thank you to each and every one of you for being with us. This, I believe, is an important thread in the tapestry of building understanding, raising our connection to the community, to learning more, sharing more, and helping to move towards that sort of greater responsibility that the Straz Center willingly takes in terms of being a point of destination, so that we can learn more about each other, so that we can really honor those who have not had the opportunity for people to recognize the pain and the challenges that Black Americans, Black and Brown, and Indigenous Americans have had to jump over, move around, and in many instances, unfortunately, be the victim of. But we are committed to true change. We are committed to true education. We are committed, as are all of the folks involved at the Straz Center, to really, really hear and be guided by your voices. Thank you so very, very much. Stay safe, stay strong, stay well.